Hey, welcome back to another episode of Leading Human. And this is a part 2, which you probably know, but just in case, if you probably would want to start this on part 1 of the previous episode as we intro what we're talking about with summarizing some of these key ideas behind In Search of the Miraculous as we continue to prep the runway for our deeper examination of our series on the upcoming Enneagram and its place in our lives as we try to understand ourselves better and practice growth work and, of course, communication with ourselves and others. So here we go, picking back up with part 2. Thanks for tuning in. Chapter 8 it's called Food for the Moon. Just basically this idea that humans are a part of a cosmic chain of energy exchange. And that's not so far out. And if you look around, like what is created doesn't die, right? It is repurposed, but matter is matter. And that's largely what's behind chapter 8. Chapter 9, he talks about humans having some of their struggles without giving it the psychological language that we have today. He was calling it imagination, daydreaming, and internal dialogue being seen as obstacles, because it's this way that there's this kind of like constant chatter, little projections, little like internal defense mechanisms, we call them now, or kind of idealizing in this imagination way. And these are obstacles to our growth and to waking up so that we can even observe ourselves. And so in this chapter, he emphasized the importance of silence and internal stillness for real observation. He then differentiates between our mechanical imagination and true creative visualization. So, I mean, this is 1915 to 19, like not even 1920 was he. This is before that, and you've heard all of this, the creative visualization, right? So it's really these thoughts and ideas without many people knowing who Gurdjieff is, and even separate. It's totally embedded in Enneagram theory and teaching, but you can even hear it in a whole lot of theory and growth work today. In the chapter 10, there was a lot of ideas about mechanicalness and how we're so suggestible, and we have these, he called them buffers, these real things, ways that we have that just keep us from hearing the truth about ourselves. And so by chapter 11, there's more on the idea of shocks, and then this idea of conscious effort, and you hear about that from a lot of spiritual teachers, sometimes talking about different kinds of prayer, and it's like there is, and will, this idea of, there's different ways to pray, but there's different attitudes in our prayer. There is different levels of just sincerity and earnestness, conscious, efforting, really wanting, really asking and desiring for something with some intensity and passion and focus. That's where more change actually happens, because there's more of, there's a lot of different people theorize as to how and why, if there's energies going out. But whatever the case, it is important to have do what you can, but still forces outside of yourself are going to have to occur. And I think that maybe the more you believe in the change, I'm saying maybe because I can't remember that exact part. We're staying high level in the summary. And I think that even though this is very abstract and you're just listening to me talk chapter by chapter about In Search of the Miraculous, somehow I feel like this is fascinating enough to possibly keep you interested enough to possibly pursue the book, or at least recognize, wow, These ideas have some depth. They are not new, and they don't have to just be associated with the Enneagram, but they are related to growth work. And so we're kind of sourcing some of these ideas so that maybe the next time you come across this language, you don't have to just write it off as new agey or something that is trite. The sources behind these ideas are profound and strong. So then in chapter 12, this idea of I like some of these ideas really stuck out to me. This idea of conscious labor and even intentional suffering. So he would talk about some key practices of the fourth way, but the conscious labor is doing what you, even if you don't want to do it, with full attention. And it reminded me of a story when he was at the Paris school. There was this great big man, a very strong man. I think he was a Russian, and I think he had been in the circus, if I remember the story. But he had been taken into the school, and he was very grateful for it. And Gurdjieff had a lot to teach him, like everyone. And one of the things that he would make him do is they would have to work on the grounds, and they would have to develop the school and make it this wonderful place. And he was literally he was having to break a rock with a sledgehammer. And for hours and hours, just hammering away at this rock that seemed like it would never break. And, he had various reactions and responses to it, feeling despair, it was pointless, or then really going at it really, really hard and fast, or then slowing down and just doing it. And then after a while, Gurdjieff was passing one time, and he, was working on it really hard, and he was proud of how he had stuck with it. And Gurdjieff said, yes, this is very good. You are making progress. But what I want you to do, you are doing it in resentment. You are doing it unconsciously. I want you to be conscious. And he said, you should be learning, practice your English practice your language while you are hammering away at the rocks. That is the way that you should practice. So Gurdjieff isn't even satisfied by the fact that he's willing to hammer away at a boulder with a sledgehammer for hours on end. He's also saying that if you want to grow, you need to be in a different kind of state. And you also could even be using your mind in a different way while you're doing it. Sometimes I think about that when I am mowing the lawn. This idea of being mindful in whatever I'm doing, and notice when sometimes when I'm mowing, a song will get caught in my head, and I cannot get the song out of my head. It just goes in this loop. It could be anything, right? It could be a Bob Dylan lyric. It could be Van Halen. I mean, it is whatever. And I've begun to notice it, right? And I'm like, okay, all right, I need to do something because I don't want to have this song going around in my head the entire time. And it's that kind of internal chatter that we should draw awareness to, even when we're doing these very mechanical, routine things. The idea behind the intentional suffering is to just voluntarily endure discomfort at times in order to awaken. And sometimes those would be body postures. Finally, by chapter 13, he hits on the Enneagram. It's the introduction, not of the Enneagram as we know it, where there are these 9 personality types, but the introduction of the Enneagram symbol as a universal map of transformation. And in this symbol, which he really stressed is not merely symbolic. It is practical, and it points to hidden knowledge, he would say, and it's very alive. We should think of it as being almost like a globe in this constant organic flux and flow, much like a planet. And it shows how All processes follow the law of 7 and require what he would call inner shocks. What's interesting to me, as a brief aside, and we'll get back to this, is that Oscar Ichazo, who ended up really effectively like creating the Enneagram of personality as largely as we know it. I mean, I think it couldn't have been what it was without Naranjo taking it to the West. Chazo was overlaying, he created a lot of Enneagrams. He created the Enneagram of divine forms. He created an Enneagram of so many things. I'm trying to understand the book on the divine forms. It's highly esoteric and pretty challenging. But he developed one with this like series of archetypes that represented the general 9 different spiritual stances, the psychological stances of unconscious human behavior. And again, I said it's an aside. We don't need to worry about it. But he said that he came upon the Enneagram not having known anything about Gurdjieff whatsoever. And I find that really fascinating and hard to believe. But I guess I'll take him at his word, because he was very brilliant. I don't think he had any reason. He was just, I think a lot of people would kind of attribute more credit of the Enneagram to Gurdjieff in the ensuing decades. And sometimes Ichazo would be annoyed by this. That he was like, yeah, Gurdjieff did not, whatever he did is very unsatisfactory. And Naranjo has said that. He's like, the teachings of Gurdjieff when it comes to the Enneagram were unsatisfying. Naranjo said that when he looked at Gurdjieff's teachings, and that actually led him to the Eureka School and discovering what he did with Oscar Ichazo. Interesting stuff. He was bringing an Enneagram symbol to the West at this time, and it was used for growth and transformation. And there was a focus on centers and in trying to balance and unify them. What I would say, there were these 9 specific archetypes and these classical senses that I think in the end, not only Ichazo, but Naranjo kind of co-developed in many respects together. And in some ways, you could even say the baton was passed to Naranjo, because he continued to do his deep psychological work. And, you know, you could make an argument that Naranjo might be the overall most important figure for beginning to develop the Enneagram as we know it today. Finally, let's just go through some of these a little bit quicker. In chapter 14, he emphasizes the necessity of a school, which we touched on earlier, and just goes into depth about it. In chapter 15, it was such rich stuff, chapter by chapter. That's why it was like hitting me at the time that it was 6 years ago. This idea of objective knowledge and esotericism, and how the two need to be able to coexist, and they're not separate from each other. And the fourth way is a modern expression of ancient wisdom. In chapter 16, there is a lot of transformation talk, death, rebirth, and the real I. This idea of the spiritual rebirth is possible through sustained inner work. In chapter 17, you think you've come a long way, and you get to 17 on self-remembering, remembering yourself, as he would say. He uses this term a lot throughout the rest of the book. And in the teachings, the idea of self-remembering is simply that it breaks the illusion of that you think you are in unity, and it begins to initiate an inner observation. You're going back to effectively how we would think about it is a truer self that has always been there, that we have forgotten. So in chapter 18, again, you hear this language in Enneagram, it's the centers of intelligence. We get at the idea of essence and personality, making a distinction between your essence, the way you were born, that true self, and personality, what you've acquired to adapt, to survive, but what now could be used, you could unlearn to get back to your essence. And most people are only going to operate from personality, but growth involves stripping away these false layers to reveal your truer essence. I don't think I need to change, but this has been, pretty interesting. That's a defense mechanism, right? That is the nature. Our nature is for the ego to not, because the ego is about, just you're fine. Stay where you're at. And this bifurcation, this duality that goes back and forth within us of good, bad, either or, stay this way, resist change, is very built within us. It's very ingrained. It's there for a reason. And it's why most people stay in personality. Besides the fact that it's hard. A lot of people, it's this is really functional. If you learn the types better, you will begin to learn how they really work for you. Why would you change? Unless you had a shock point and needed to or something. If you're a 7, you might have trouble at times identifying boundaries, but you're having fun. Why would you stop having fun and going from the next thing to the next? If you're 3, why would you stop being a productive performer? You're getting things done. It's working for you. You're a success, right? And so on. For a 4, right? It's why would you stop wanting to be so original and profound and full of these introspective insights? Or if you're a 6, and you're thinking, it might be more fun to be a 7, but 6s in their stance of protection and needing to build trust and not that works for them. They're quite good there. Thank you very much. And so on. Chapter 19, I think this is an important one, the role of emotion. That comes into play. And the emotional energy is vital, he says, but typically wasted through negativity. Real emotional experiences are rare and powerful. Negative emotions are mechanical, and we should struggle against them. And I bet you've noticed it within yourself and probably talked about it in various forms. Why are humans more inclined toward these negative emotions? Theorists have their ideas, right? We needed, in a survival sense, for our brains to adapt to be cautious and in a survival mode. Wasn't as necessary for survival, was maybe considered not safe. There's many ways that we could begin to try to understand why do we default into this negative stuff. I think it's far deeper than that, but we do. I think that's just the first step, is to observe and accept and begin to try to understand that we are. And so how can you, no matter whether you're a heart type, body type, or a head type, how do you use emotions consciously in order to use them more effectively with the limited energy you have? And then finally, the chapter 20 is the last chapter, and it's just about the way forward, and it's a summary of the teachings and the necessity of doing rather than theorizing, And I mean, I literally just heard that at the very end of The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr in that very last chapter, this idea of him articulating so eloquently this idea of practice versus theory or understanding intellectually. When you practice, you're in the water. And when you're analyzing, you are separated from the water and you are looking at it. It's like there is this practice is where the change happens. Thinking about the practice can get you somewhere. It's better. You want it. You want to have a framework and you want to have pragmatics and reason, but you must practice. And that's very hard for a lot of us. But that is the way forward. So in summary, these ideas that humans are asleep and we must wake up, often through these ideas of self-observation and self-remembering. We are not one I, and I think we kind of take this for granted. We realize IFS systems, internal family systems, and these dialogues and these different personas we now accept that we have. There's many different conflicting sub-personalities within us, that there is this way to combine our centers of intelligence and live in a set-apart, countercultural way in everyday life. He talks about the law of 3 and 7. The Enneagram is a tool of transformation. and that real growth requires suffering and conscious labor and a teacher or a school. These systems that challenge our modern assumptions about autonomy, identity, and progress. The critique of mechanical life anticipates much of what Byung-Chul Han discusses in The Burnout Society and also in The Swarm that we're going to talk about in an upcoming episode. So mechanical life, look at our life. I think that was partly the inspiration behind wanting to do this episode in the context of having just finished reading Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano from 1952 about humans being divided into camps of the engineers who control the machines and the people who can't do that. And so the machines have replaced their jobs and they are now living, a mechanized life. They're not starving, but they have no purpose. They don't know who they are. Gurdjieff's teaching actually is particularly relevant in an age of algorithmic control and internalized surveillance. So this, whether we want to give this credit to him or not, wherever it came from, the real freedom is internal. That's Jesus, right? Jesus was teaching us that. That's, Richard Rohr explicates that in many of his teachings about the kind of conscious work that has been shown to us to be profound and the direction in which we can find freedom from the mechanicalness and the unconsciousness of the way that we behave and live. So, if you have hung in there for this discussion, I am impressed. And thanks for tuning in. And I hope that this continues to be a source of information where you get depth and substance and are maybe occasionally entertained, but informed and entertained enough that you want to stay with the ideas, following it in your curiosity and your openness and your own learning. If there is anything to take away from this, I'm sure there are many things. I don't know what might be hitting you, but I would encourage you to just remember the idea of practice. It would either be the very last idea or the very first idea. And the very first idea is this idea of slowing down and listening and self-observation, which can be especially hard in our rapid mode of life, full of machines that were supposed to slow down life for us, right? Make it easier. And somehow things have continued to speed up. I guess, we could argue that there's a lot of good that comes with that anxiety and bad, I guess we could say. So either that idea of slowing down and figuring it, well, it's tied. Now that I'm thinking of it, it's tied together because slowing down and developing and practicing consciousness and not just thinking about it or learning about it, you have to slow down to do that. You have to be able to slow down to listen and to do the inner work. So I hope you find opportunities to do that. And I wish you well on your own journey. Let us know how we can continue to bring you the kind of content, the kind of information, and the kind of shared wisdom that you need in your own life. Until next time, we'll see you on Leading Human.
At Big Self School, we know sometimes you just need a conversation that cuts through the noise. That's why we offer a totally free, no strings attached, laser-focused coaching session. No forced packages, no complicated intake. Just show up with what you're carrying right now and we'll coach through it. Want to work on your Enneagram number? We can. But more than anything, we meet you where you are. Curious? Click the link in the show notes and book your session with Chad right now.